Hello, Korea's followers. I'm Lee Ha-sung. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the RK-US alliance, and as well as the 120th anniversary of the immigration of Koreans to the US. Today, we invited a guest who will tell us about the stories of the Koreans within the US who have been the connecting bridge between the two countries. Shall we welcome her with applause? Nice to meet you, Professor Yu and Tyler. Could you briefly introduce yourself to our Korea's followers?
So my name is Leanne Yu, and I teach Korean history at Korea University. But I was born in the United States. I am of Korean heritage, and I started studying Korean history in graduate school, have been coming back and forth to Korea for the better part of about 30 years, and I've been living here in Korea for 10 years now. And my specialization is the time period where Korea is going through a transition from the pre-modern to the modern period, about the late 19th to the early 20th century. But because I'm the only foreign professor who teaches in English, I actually have to cover everything, but have to be a jack of all trades in some sense.
Yeah, hi there everybody. My name is Tyler. I'm from the United States, but I've been living here in South Korea for the past 13 years. I came here to go to grad school and eventually got involved in media. So now I work in Korean entertainment and media, and I also do some entrepreneurship on the side. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming here. I heard that this year marks the 70th anniversary of the RK-US alliance. The alliance went through many changes during the period of time, and Tyler, you are well aware of the changes and growth of Korea.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been just so much change that we've seen. I mean, obviously, over the past 70 years, that's a ridiculous amount of time. But even in only the 13 years that I have been here, like the rate at which this country changes is incredible. We talk about economic change, right? How much Korea has grown as an economy and switched from being a recipient of aid to being a giver of aid and being, a member of the OECD and all of this. But, above and beyond that, we've also seen it now become really like a cultural producer. Everybody's watching Korean content. Everybody's paying attention to what's going on in the Korean consumer market. Just been a huge shift to what this place means to everybody else in the world.
I've seen Korea since the first time I traveled here in 1985. And so this was before Korea was actually fully democratized. And then seeing it go through this transition politically, economically, culturally, it's been a dramatic but also a very rapid change. And it's been wonderful to see and witness that personally, how Korea has been able to really just blossom over the past 20, 30 years.
Do the changes ever affect your choice in your life?
Well, of course, because I teach Korean history, that began as a sort of a personal journey, my own personal family history. And I always had this penchant for learning about history, but being able to look at Korea and see Korea in the wider context. In the United States, especially when I was growing up, we never learned anything about Korea. The only mention of Korea in the schools was possibly about the Korean War. But I always knew that there was so much more about Korea that needed to be known. And so I would start doing some digging around. And when I was in college, there were no classes offered on Korean history. And so I started taking Japanese history classes. And I actually wrote my senior thesis on the colonial period, because that way I could kind of fudge it a little bit.
Yeah, you could talk a little bit about the peninsula, right?
Right. So I could, under the guise of studying Japanese history, also study Korean history at the same time. And my advisor was completely on board with it. But when I went to the library to do research, I saw an entire section on Chinese history, an entire section on Japanese history, and about this many books on Korean history. So when I decided to go to graduate school, I figured, well, if someone like me doesn't start studying and developing Korean history, then who's going to do it? So that was my journey.
And nowadays, we can't talk about the RK-US alliance without mentioning K-culture.
Oh, well, I am deeply indebted to K-culture, the Korean wave, Hallyu, all of it, because I have so many students now in my classes that have come to Korea to learn about Korean history.
Right.
And their initial introduction has been through Korean dramas, Korean TV, K-pop, all of that. And so if this is what sparks their interest in learning more about Korea and learning about Korean history, then I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that you said that because sometimes I go back to the United States and I work with students there who are learning Korean at Middlebury College. And you find a pretty consistent pattern where people discover an initial interest in Korea through K culture, right? Whether it's food or dramas or music or what, because they're easy to access. Nobody runs into a library and says, "What is there is a book on Korean history?" That's like, well, maybe some people do, but not. That's not what most people do when they discover something. And so when you see that, you start to ask yourself other questions about this culture, this place. Oh, what about this? What about that? And that really quickly brings them to want to learn more on a really deep level. So it's fascinating to me when I see these students in the United States who are like, oh yeah, I was a super big fan of this person, but right now I want to do, research on, the changing gender roles of women and Korean society from this date to this date. And you're like, wow,
that's inspiring.
A deep shift, but it's totally happening.
So over the past 10 years, I've seen an enormous increase in international students coming to Korea from all different parts of the world. And again, as we talked about, now if I don't put a cap on my class, I'll have 250, 300 students show up and they're sitting on the floors and they're crying because I'm not letting them in the class and there are not enough seats in the classroom to accommodate them. So it's been really heartwarming for me to see that there is this growing interest, and I try to make myself available to all of these students because there just aren't enough opportunities for them to learn in English.
So when did your parents decide to come to the US?
My father immigrated in 1957. It was a long time ago. My grandfather, so my father's father, was a cabinet minister, a 장관, for the Lee Sung-man presidency.
Oh.
Wow, I see. So what do you think is the biggest difference between your parents' generation and the current and future generation of the Korean society?
Well, my parents' generation had a much harder time because they were kind of like pioneers. This was following the heels of the Korean War. Korea was pretty much devastated as a country. It was one of the poorest countries in the world in 1957. And so they had a hard time because most Americans knew nothing about Korea, only through what they heard about with the Korean War. But if you ask the average American, they probably couldn't really even find it on the map. And there was also a lot of confusion with China, Japan, Korea. And so because there is just very little information about Korea, I think they had a harder time. They didn't have any kind of a network or much of a community to speak of. Nowadays, you go to any major metropolitan city in the United States, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, and there's a Koreatown, if not multiple Koreatowns. There are Korean churches, there's Korean community. You can take your driver's license test in Korean.
Wow, dramatic change.
It's much more friendly, and so I think it's a huge change compared to back in the 50s and the 60s.
In the United States, we didn't accept immigration freely from Asian nations until after 1965. Because we had, that's when we implemented the Civil Rights Act and Title VII and all of the anti-discrimination legislation that we currently have. To have immigrant history from an Asian country prior to the mid-1960s and after the mid-1960s are two completely different things in an American like political science context. My father's from Austria, but he was born in Ethiopia. So his parents wanted to bring him to the United States with them in the early 1960s from Ethiopia. But the US government in Ethiopia said, we don't know if we can take your baby because we don't know your baby's race. So my dad couldn't immigrate to the United States until after 1965. So the family brought him in 1966. The reason why I'm saying that is like the United States that we talk about now and the United States that we were talking about back then are completely different places. And so Korean immigration and Korean communities in the United States now have so much stronger connections to growing communities than they could have in the past.
Mm-hmm. So the U.S. is often called a country of immigrants.
Right.
But I want to know more about what is so unique about the history of Korean immigration to the U.S. to add on that.
Well, I think that they were really pioneers. I think that it was something that was born out of the modern experience. And if I'm to specify what that was, as the Cold War, really, because we have this US presence in the southern part of the peninsula. And because of that, there are these strong ties between the United States and South Korea. And that then naturally lends itself to having South Koreans immigrate eventually to the United States. I think that is something that is very unique to South Korea and to Korean immigrants.
So there is a political background.
There is
like
definitely the
Korean
political
War
background. Yes.
So let's talk more about Korea-U.S. relations. The RK and U.S. alliance that was established like 70 years ago,
Right.
and now is evolving into a global comprehensive strategic alliance that protects the peace in the world. So do you have any opinions on these changes in alliance between the two countries?
Well, I think that Korea has become increasingly more important from the US perspective because of its strategic position geographically. It's always had this geographic significance in the world, but I think particularly now it is even more so with increasing tensions with Russia and China and North Korea. And so because of its strategic placement, South Korea plays a very important role. But I think that that alliance and that relationship has always been there, and it definitely waxes and wanes over time and becomes more important or not as important. But if you also add to that the fact that South Korea has now become this economic powerhouse as well as a cultural machine, then all of those factors combined make it even that much more influential in their alliance.
Oh, there's so much to be talked to that needs to be discussed nowadays, I feel like. So it's been a long time, you know. It's been decades and decades, and the world has changed a lot. Just as much as the United States has changed, just as much as South Korea has changed, the rest of the world has changed a lot. And so the value of a long-lasting alliance, in my opinion, just has to keep going up, because otherwise there's too many challenges that we're facing right now. And I mean, you can't say that the alliances are always perfect, right? Not like an alliance is that you're trying to help each other and you have mutually agreed upon interests and goals in the long term. That doesn't mean that you're the same country. You can have different opinions and you're not going to agree on everything, but your end goal overlaps, right? And your values overlap. And so you try to step in unison. I think we need to really focus on, well, then what are we going to do moving forward? This is not just about Korea and the United States anymore. And it's time that we stop talking about it like that. So it's not about what Korea wants, not about what the United States wants. It's about what we can do together to make sure that things go in the direction that we both want, right? And I think the importance and the amount of weight that's going to sit on that alliance is only going to increase over time. So I cannot stress how important it is that not only people pay attention to that alliance, but that Americans as well as Koreans, individuals, start to think more about some of the global or regional issues that are related to the alliance, like security, or, for example, how is climate change, right, and sea level rise going to affect, naval bases, and how is that going to affect the ability of the United States and South Korea to defend sovereignty when it's challenged. So yeah, I think it's extremely important, and we need to stop thinking of it as a thing of the past, because I think too many people think of the Korea-US alliance as just a product of the Korean War, just an extension of this older generation that wants to celebrate the past. And while that may be part of it, that's not what it's going to have to be in the future. It's going to have to focus around democratic values, around freedom of speech, around national sovereignty. These are values that South Korea holds dear. These are values that the United States holds dear. And if we don't stick together and protect those values together, there are other people in the world who want to make sure that we do not have access to those things.
And if I could just add to what the very amazing point that Tyler just made, there also tends to be this perception that the U.S. ROK alliance, it has been historically imbalanced, where the United States has been the bigger power and has had more influence than the ROK. I think that imbalance, or at least that perspective, is starting to even out over the years. And as it evens out, it's really important for South Koreans to understand that that also means that South Koreans have more responsibility.
Right. So
and
true.
because South Korea has more responsibility, this means that this alliance that has been made, it is there to ensure peace and stability in the region. And that South Korea now needs to take a more active, a more proactive role in ensuring that that peace remains in place.
Sorry, I just want to just go off of this. So very recently, I don't know how much you follow this in the news, but South Korea, I believe, gained a seat at the UN Security Council, right? So that's extremely significant because
That's huge.
That's absolutely huge. So just to talk about what you were just mentioning, Leanne, this is no longer a situation in which one country is a developed country and the other country is trying to catch up. That is not the situation. The situation is that both countries are developed countries. Both countries have different sets of strengths and weaknesses. And so they can help each other more than they could in the past, right? And now that Korea is in the position it is and has the influence that it does, not only does it have that responsibility, but it also, if it moves well in unison with its allies, like the United States, can have so much more of a positive impact on the world. And so I would really urge not only people in the Korean government and Korean companies and et cetera to think more about that, but really Korean people on average, you are not just isolated on some peninsula in Northeast Asia. You are extremely influential. People are paying attention to what you think and what you want. So you better start to think about what it is that you want for the world. I think that that's a really important thing for people nowadays.
Right. So what actions in particular are needed to contribute more to the international community as a global pivotal state?
Well, in my opinion, I think that because South Korea has been such a beneficiary of its alliance with the United States and to a certain extent with Japan, it has now developed to a point where it can give back to the international community. And so I think it's very important that South Korea start to open up its borders, to take in more immigrants, to provide more opportunities for people of non-Korean backgrounds, and to accept them as part of the Korean citizenry, which has been largely defined by blood and ethnicity up until now. But I think that as South Korea now has more of a leading role, especially in the region, that they need to embrace the international community if they're going to take a leadership role in it.
So as a second generation immigrant, could you tell us what the ROK-US alliance means to you in one sentence?
Well, I think I'm the embodiment of the ROK-US alliance. Really, I think that that's been a very privileged position that I have been able to occupy, is being able to go back and forth, being able to act as a bridge between the two countries, much like Tyler has, but myself as well.
What is your answer, Tyler?
So I have mixed emotions because part of me feels like really frustrated at the fact that most people view the US-Korea alliance as being this kind of like old Korean War historical thing that's, just older generation thing. That's what old people talk about. That's how many people view it, honestly, right? But there's so much to be done, and there's so much potential, and this alliance has so much more importance than just what's already happened. The importance lies in what we're going to do with it in the future, in my perspective. And that can be inspired by the past, but there are such big challenges that the world is facing, and I can't stress that more. And for me, the alliance between the United States and Korea is about that. It's about what can we do moving forward, and I'm excited to see how that becomes redefined, because I think has much more potential than people have actually imagined.
It flew by.
Yeah.
So how was it today?
Oh, it's been fantastic to be able to talk about things that are near and dear to my heart, and to see how others have been experiencing sort of similar to what I have been experiencing.
I thought it was great to have the opportunity to talk to both of you about the relationship between the United States and Korea and multiple facets of that. I hope that there are more opportunities to talk about it, and not just about what it is and why it's important, but what we can do with it. And also maybe find ways to include more people, students and members of the public to talk about what we can do for the world.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.